Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 1. And so far been very consistent. Someone told me the only thing you understand is that's Volume 1.
You say it every day.
Middle of chapter 156. Okay, so interesting new concepts have been introduced. So the summary in English online, I would say that in this chapter we introduced a new concept called Eris Netzutzis and Kalim of Teu, that become and shape the structure of Zoh, the midas of Tikkun. Remember Teu Tikkun. So Tikkun comes to repair Teu. Teu, the pieces that were left over from Teu are what build Tikkun. It's like they do it like a building that was shattered. And from the shattered pieces you rebuild a better world, a better structure. So, in the context of our discussion here, which he explained was what? Chayu is the Eris, connected to the Sheirish Eris, the root of the Eris, all the way to Eir HaBlikul, Kei HaBlikul. The Kalim, V'Gamoichad, are connected either with the Shkeich HaGvul, or with the Eris that are Mislabish and shaped by the containers. There's 3 Yechudim. First one is removed from the world because Eir is just Gilei Atzmus, just to reveal the divine. Kalim is to create structure. So now he's applying that in a microcosmic form that's the team Meichin means. So Gimel V'Shemish, which is according to the Arizal, is Chayui Ma'elam Elonis, Kod Material Elam, Alef Chachach Lech Bina, and Midas Ki Me'elam Hema, Ki Me'elam, like he says, Ki Me'elam, Zohar Datzilis, that's where the structure begins. To explain that, he brought from Teu, from Eitz Chaim rather, about Teu, Shabbos HaZos, from the 3 levels in Teu. The 3 levels of Eris, Netzutzis, Kalim, Eris expire, energy expires, the Netzutzis, the sparks remain in the shards, and then the shard, they build Zohar. Now, what does that mean? So we see from that the Midas of Atzilus have a personality. They already have a Metzias, as he calls it. They're a Metzias man, Metzias Dover. Because Teu is an Emlech, it's a sense of an identity. It's not total bittul. Even their bittul is also not purely driven by the Kavanah Midas. There's their own intensities that they're invested in. And that's why even when they manifest in containers, the containers can't contain them. That's why Zohar, which comes out of that, is also Metzias Dom. So it's a Chiddush. Zohar, Midas of Atzilus, the Rei Tikkun, what it gets from Teu is that it's a sense, it's some type of substance, some type of structure, whereas Meichin is still removed from that. The fact that Teu, actually, all of Tikkun is a Tikkun on Teu, so he says, but yes, the Teu itself, when you break it down, there's a difference between the first 3 Gimel Rishonos. There's no real Shvira there. The only Chitzeni is being over the Shvira. The reason he doesn't explain it here, but the reason is obvious, because remember we learned, if you remember Chachma, Bina, Chachma is always connected to the source. Bina is already beginning to manifest in details, fleshing it out. So Pnimius Bina, as we learned, is still connected to Pnimius Chachma. Pnimius Bina is the Tamsis, if you remember, it's getting the emes of the idea, Kudus emes. Whereas Chitzenius Bina is the details. So sometimes when one looks at the details, you can't really see the whole essential core. That's why there the Shvira is possible. Some places actually says that in the middle was the breaking. In Bina it touched, the break touched, and in Chachma it only felt the effect. Rebbe has a Sicha with the Kudei Yitzchak, I remember, 3 different levels in Teu. But bottom line is that the breakage, the shattering of Teu doesn't affect the Meichin as it does the Midas, primarily in the Midas. And therefore, the Gimel Rishonos of Tikkun are also such that they're removed from the Metzias. Gimel Rishonos of Mechinas HaTikkun, but it's a Mechinas Metzias. So the Gimel Rishonos, even in Teu, are a state of Bittul. They're still Teu. It doesn't go into the distinction. But you can't compare it to the Zayin Tachtenis, to the Midas of Toyu, where the real Shvira takes place. Now, one final thing he qualified, which was that even though Midas come from Moichin, and that the Moichin affect the Midas, in other words, they make it mature, they said weaken and tame and subjugate the Midas. So it's not just the Midas and Toyu, Tikkun, I'm not like in Toyu. Toyu, they're just wild and untamed. That's why there was a shattering. Here in Tikkun, there is something, but nevertheless, it's still Messias. So at the end of the day, Midas of Atzilus is what he's trying to establish, Gamuhi, the Midas, that is connected to existence. It's the beginning of a connection, but it's still Iyuvid Hamuichad. Remember that. It's still united with the source. However, it's already identifying with creation. Remember, the key thing to Chayir and Gamuhi is to go back all the way in the source, even in Keiach HaBlibul. Remember, Keiach HaBlibul is all to reveal the source. It's not connected to creation. It's there, as we learned all the way back to the beginning of Shavuos, that also has a reason, because the God doesn't have to reveal Eir HaBlibul. There's a kavanah. Kavanah is to cause bittul in the world. But the kavanah is not to create the world. It doesn't recognize, in other words, it's not the instruments to create. Remember, the artist, it's within the artist's vision. Whereas Gemui is to create the world. So he wants to establish in this chapter how that is also consistent with our Arizal's interpretation of Gemui as the Midas. That's where the Midas, just like by us, Midas are our primary relationship with others is through our emotions. Meichin is primarily self-absorbed, self-oriented rather, internal, introverted. Same thing as Lamaila and Atzilus. The Midas are what begin to associate, define existence. So it's very consistent to what we learned before about the Kelim. The Midas are, in other words, the instruments to create, essentially. So here's establishing it through bringing the whole thing with Tayu. So it proves that it's Mitzias Dover. Tayu essentially just proves that, just comes to explain how the Midas of Atzilus, the Tikkun, are Mitzias Dover because they're rooted in the Tayu. So Midas, so even though in Tikkun, obviously the Midas are far more regulated and tamed, but there's still Midas, there's still feelings, there's still a sensation of a Metzias. There's still sense something. In other words, Chesed of Atzilus loves, is attracted to something. So it has that element.
There's still sense identity, right? There's still sense identity.
Identity, yeah. Identity, that's a good word. Now, remember, back in chapter 152, he said, the Lamaila there's no Midas. The only reason there's Midas is because Nitzach is only because Shleimus Ha'atzmus. God has everything, so he has also, you can't say that he has sensations. You can't say he gets excited. If you remember, he said that very clearly. That's why those Chokrim said, because you remember, that there's no Pu'ulas, that's why they said there's only Pu'ulas HaChesed. And the Rebbe Hashem said that on one side they're right, one side they're wrong. If they're wrong, that there are Midas. They're right, that it's not just, that it's not that God is not getting excited, it's not a sensation like we have, it's not an emotion, a need or something like that. But nevertheless, to explain that what Midas meant there, he says, so Midas is a divine expression of Shlemus. Because the Midas has been Chachma Shem
Can it be like he's planning Midas?
That's it. They was talking about Atzmis and Midas, that's the thing. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's seemingly a question you can ask. Since above there's no Midas, so what Midas are we talking about here in that sense? Are we talking those above? Because then you could simply say the Midas of Atzilus are really Eir. It's Eir HaChesed, Eir HaKvir, it's Hashem Mitzatmus. He has, like you said, planning it, like the vision of the artist. That's not correct. That's how God sees it. That's how God sees it. Like Iyuv Gamuichad would say that he's one with those midas. Those midas are just an expression of it. But in Atzilus, they do take on an identity of Kelim. That's a key thing here. They have an identity. We're not talking how it is with Etzim. We're not talking as it is in air. We're talking Kelim. That there are actual instruments. They're ruchnistic instruments, but they're real instruments. There is an identity there.
What about if you just strip the translation of the word midah from it, and without using the word emotion and feeling, Mila, you could just say that midah is like an instrument, like you said. So it's really not.
Yeah.
And the
correct.
word midah also
But the type of instrument it is, it's shlemus atzmos, expressing himself, that he can create an identity called midah, so to speak. And Keich HaGvul, the Keich HaGvul is
the word midah, that's what it means. And it doesn't mean emotion or.
midah means a parameter.
Parameter.
Yeah.
That's not you say.
Like he said farther earlier, remember he said midah was an inclination, it wasn't a emotion, it was an inclination. It was an atiyah.
That's why it's called midah, because the midah of a chet, netzach, and not like you say. The midah of chet is the word for it.
Okay, so we have now, and therefore also, being that the midah now in Atzilus, okay, so it's a Metzias Dover, and the way they come out of the mind, they also Metzias, and therefore also the reflection of the mind is not core intelligence, Atzmi Samech. Doesn't talk about it. No, why not? The same midas, it's just like there's midas Atzilus, there's midas there. You don't have to say that. Same reasoning. Okay. So we stopped right here in the middle there.
Yeah.
We'll continue. Matzim Samech, that was the last
Atzmo or.
right. We'll come now pay the Kukupay, the in Ivagam, Wicha, the Prince Io, Harizal, Orl Lavad, Lebchinis Atzmus. So we see here in the interpretation of Garmuhi, of the Midas, we also see their relationship with existence. They're a Metzias Dova, they have an identity, and they have what we call substance. Let me qualify again, because remember, in Atzilus there's no substance, there's no physical substance. But just like we have in this world, we have, let's say, a container, a cup, or you have a light bulb, you have energy within it. In Atzilus itself, in Ruchnis itself, there's also two sides. You could say there's a Ruchnis Dikakeli and a Ruchnis Dikaer, so to speak. Just want to spell that out so you get that clear. It's harder to understand, as we've been discussing many times, that even abstracting a Ruchnis, Asir Ruchnis is hard. But nevertheless, relatively speaking,
You can understand that.
Yeah.
Just like in the physical is
also just on a more subtle level.
Did we once mention that?
It's a Ruchnius thing.
No, but
It's
even in the
amazing.
cup, there's a physical level in the cup, and there's a physical
Exactly, and there's many, many levels. I would basically say all of Chassidus is coming to refine us to keep understanding deeper sense of what Ruchnis is. Absolutely.
Go from one lower
Until you get to a
the
point
higher or.
where there's not even Ruchnis, where the Lakus is higher than Ruchnis. That's the point. It's not difficult. I'll tell you an example you can give for it would be here you have letters on the page and it has an idea. Kelim, when I speak, there's also letters coming out. I just said letters coming out, right? And there's an idea. Machshava also has letters and an idea. So you have three levels, Eris and Kelim, and they're subtler and subtler. A letter on paper is much more crass than a letter coming out of my mouth. A letter from speech is much more substantial than a letter within the mind. So you see here, you can constantly have Eris and Kelim on different levels.
Crass meaning like Gashmi, it's like.
Tangible,
Yeah.
defined.
Yeah.
Remember, we are creatures of the tangible. Let us we relate to tangible. The truth is, everything that's real in our lives is not that way, by the way. Love, truth, God, spirituality, soul. Anything that has something that is deeper doesn't have that. But we identify far more with our senses are very powerful.
And it could be that even those high things like love and stuff like that, you have to link it. It has to be identified with something concrete, and then it becomes a Metzias. So,
Yeah, but it's an example.
Yeah.
See, with love of a human being, you can learn to what means love of God. Everything becomes a mushal. Remember there was that fundamental chapter that everything becomes a mushal in Gashmis. Because even in Gashmis now, for example, science and physics is a tremendous teacher of teaching the sublime. You see a flower, and We all know a flower is not just a flower. It has all the mechanisms within it. Cross-pollination. When it releases the carbon dioxide that it absorbs of Earth. I mean, there's so much going on in a simple wind or a simple wave of an ocean. So all these come to teach us that what you see is not what you get. Is all these different dimensions. And it goes higher and higher. Okay. So we got here is that now, basically what really is also is very helpful, I think, if you really want to apply it, that whatever we've learned about Eir HaBlikvul and Keich HaGvul, Eir Pnimi, Eir Makif, whatever we've learned in the most abstract levels really comes down to a difference between Meich and Midas in the microcosm. It's not quite the same, obviously. But in a way, when God created us with a mind and emotions, He's like creating within us an Eir that's Megala Etzem, and a Midah that relates to Azulos. So you have within us, we have those two levels. I think that's a very powerful way of grounding. Someone say, okay, tell me what is Eir HaBlikvul and Keich HaGvul in our reality. And I'll say, a taste of it would be Meich and Midas. If you're absorbed, or when you're completely consumed with an idea, the idea is just expressing whatever it is that you're trying to understand. And then there's how you're relating that, applying it. With application is also a very good application. Application to another, application to outside of yourself. So those are the two key things. So that's where we are up to. Okay. So it's like Garmui, and in this midah, there's only a reflection of the Etzem HaMech. Now, I believe, as I said, he's going now back to, all the way back to what chapter did we say? 130?
130, 132, 34.
Right, he's definitely referring straight back to that. Let's see.
134 is Yisrael Sabbath 1.
Yeah, we saw that 130.
Big impact.
What?
So much.
Hold on. Yeah. It would definitely be helpful to go back and learn on that. For now, we'll just continue. Okay. So it says like this.
You know that?
Arzeo b'midas debina. Now he's qualified. Now we say that midas and mitzvahs davar, right? It's a substantial identity, has substance and matter, so to speak. He says that's primarily he says that's Arzeo b'midas debina. That's a midas of bina. The sham b'chinas mitzvahs. That's where they are. It's a substance. To the point that you could say that they're there in a state of pregnancy. That was Svencha Tamala Bitnam. Now I remember. Bitnam is the Bet Na'im, which is Bima. Ima Bonim Smechem. And in there, they're the Midas. That's the point. So it's like the concealed levels within the follow of the Betan. So there's something there. It's mother. There's something inside the belly. Right, but you can't say it's not a mitzvah.
Seals in Bina, the Midas.
It's not full blown.
Yeah, you can't say it's a separate entity. And that's all separate, but it is an entity. Let's put it this way. It's a good example. Before pregnancy, all you have is the mother. Pregnancy, you have another entity growing within her. It's still part of her. It's an extension of her, but something's there. That thing will become a midah, a full-blown midah, when it leaves the belly, when the mother's womb. That's a birth. So midas in Meichin is the state of Ibur. In Bina, when you're contemplating on something, we got this at length earlier. So there's also midas and chachma, as he's going to say in a moment. But midas and Bina, midas and chachma is the example shtick. Like your chachma, you get it, and you have a sense that it's going in this direction, you can't fully explain it. Bina is a full-blown explanation of something. After you've done all the research, after you've absorbed and you've processed ideas, there comes at the end of the process of a good contemplation is what are the conclusions? What do we learn from this? Like a good contemplation. What's the contemplation? You study something, and now you say, okay, what have we learned from all that we've studied? That process should only be at the end. You don't start asking what we learned from it before you learn it, or else you miss the point. So there's a Bina level. You're understanding the idea. This idea now is going to become pregnant with application. And then come the applications. That's midah should be. So it's already mitzvah.
It could be one or more meters, or it could be has to be all of them. When we're talking developing in the pregnant bina.
Well, remember, we're not talking about a child. Here, it's going to, like you said, there's going to be different inclinations. Say, Shmai Vavtalion taught an idea. Shammai and Hillel listen. After they're listening, this one begins to lean toward Gvura, this one toward Chesed. Still on an intellectual level. They haven't yet passed it.
Right.
They haven't said Aser, Mutter, or Chayev, Potter, like that. But, so Tobina, so yeah, here we're talking, it could end up being one inclination. Obviously, the mind, like we learned earlier, in the middle of the process, it can go many directions. It can go Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, that's for sure. But it will come to, the point is that it will come to one psak there at the end. As we learned much earlier. So yeah, but remember, even Shammai and Hillel can go back to the source and rethink it, and come back with a different conclusion the second time around. Because I wouldn't go there right now. That's because a midah is different than a midah and meichin are not the same thing. A midah is an application. You see this all the time. Same theories. Years later, people conclude complete opposite conclusions from the same idea that earlier they thought was leading to this conclusion. And someone missed something, or someone rethought it, and they come to a different conclusion. You have this very common. That idea could be sound. You go deeper into it, you have different type of applications. Anyway, but primarily what he wants to say is that Bina, which is the mother, Ima, that's where there's the Metzias Dava, the Midas. That's why you could say, to the extent you could say that there's something in pregnancy. But a Chachma, just like Chachma itself is not a Metzias. What's Chachma? A spark of an idea. So even though in there's buried a kernel of an amida, of an inclination, of an application, but it's not a Metzias there at all. Now this definitely refers back to Kuf Lamed-Al, because he's mamish. You want to see where this is in
But it doesn't.
It always ties in.
Doesn't use the word Dibur. Doesn't use the word Dibur.
Any page.
Oh yeah.
No, when you're learning,
It just happened.
I remember
especially the same thing.
I remember the same pasuk was in Bala Ditram. The Shor says that earlier. There's the Chachman Bina, he talks at the end of chapter 155, 135,
It works,
and
whatever it
156.
is, it works.
Right.
Immediately.
So it's clear, there's no question. It was clear. That's why I'm saying this.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's clear that he's referring back to this. One second. You got to go back there to see the details. Showed him, yeah, I remember the whole thing. Okay. 1 second. Yeah, there was the whole discussion there. Remember, Primis Bina is like Primis Abba, the Tamsis, the Kudus HaTamsis, the Kudus HaSkola. Anyway, let's continue here. So the Meichin, the Midas is not a Metzias. Which you also understand from this, why in Toihu, Chetzenius Bina, the Shvira, can affect it. Because of Metzias, there's something to be shattered. In the state of Bittul and Chachma, even in a Toihu, nothing to shatter. It's Chachma, it's a spark. Even in Toihu. It's like there are very few containers. Like, there's nothing to shatter because there's a very minimal container there. No, Chachma in Toihu, not in the Kud.
Chapter 151.
Yeah, what do you see?
It says being in Tzulach van the Vietnam coffee. It's about the Meichin in the middle.
Yeah. It's not the only place. There are a few places. Yeah. 151, you're saying? He's saying it's you're saying commercial book. It says being right here. He said.
It says 151.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We looked there. Yeah, absolutely. He was saying there that at the end of the day, with all the contemplation, all the levels of application from the 4 levels of, remember we talked about the bonus 4 levels?
Mm-hmm.
All of them still making them into separate things. Yeah. Look, the big discussion of intellect and emotions is giving us handles in our own reality, in our lives, to understand these 2 levels of Erein Sof. Everything we learned in the first section of the Ma'er Makif and Er Pnimi, right? Keser and the faculties, Ratzon and the Keiches HaNefesh, right? All that. They're a pool. They're a bleak pool. In Keiches HaNefesh, in our human faculties, essentially Meichin and Midas. Even though you could argue what I mean, it's Ratzon and Keiches, but we're going to get back to that later. But right now, there's a certain manifestation. Meichen is the bridge to help us get into the transcendent, essentially, within the Keiches premium. Because Meichen, at the end of the day, is still Keiches premium.
So that was
Now the others, that's what the others did. The others are, remember, expanding the Primi boundaries. Remember, they're expanding the energy within existence to the point that it could become a container to then start receiving real Eirah Blikul. That's where he's going now. So essentially, it works like this. Our midas are subjective. I'll speak on a very basic level. The midas are subjective. What means subjective? Self-interest. I want this, I want that. In the worst scenario, it's basically complete self-absorption, narcissism, etc. Even if it's not that, it's a sense of self. Our intelligence is supposed to be objective, reflective, and help us tame the subjectivity of our interests. So self-interest shouldn't cloud our judgment, should care about another, etc., etc. Should think about Elokus, not just about itself. So Meichen is essentially maturing the emotions that on their own, remember in the lowest level of Yisrael, Zuta, we learned about the Midas as they are, actually not Yisrael, so what was the lowest level? Yaakov. Which was pure Midas, it's like the lowest state of Midas, the immature Midas of a child or of an adult. So Zuta, you start beginning to mature them. Then you get to a point where you really are able to be absorbed by a divine concept and completely ignore your self-interest. That's pure Meichen. And that's supposed to lead you to levels that go all the way to Eirah Blikul. Because remember, intelligence is still a faculty, an Primi. It's still a faculty that's not dependent on faith or on desire or will or something outside of structure. But within structure, it's helping the structure, which is defined by Midas, to get beyond structure. So you really, that's what you're dealing with. Midas, the Meichen helps lead you to a place where Chachma will lead you into Kesser. And there's hundreds of switches, obviously, in between. There's the Midas, there's Meichen Sheba Midas, there's Midas Sheba Meichen, there's Midas and Bina, there's Midas and Chachma, there's Chachma and the previous Chachma, Chetzenis Chachma, previous Chachma, Chachma Stema, all the way to Atik and so on. So so I'm just giving you the map. That's the map. This, you talk about retracing the steps. What I just mentioned is the interface, the main place of the interface, from Midas to Meichen into higher than Meichen. But without Meichen, you're not jumping there. Because it's the mind that allows you to imagine, allows you to dream, and allows you to take you into that place. If you jump from Midas, let's say, to Amunah, it's going to be a type of inconsistency. It won't be integrated. So Meichen has, on one hand, it's Primi, it's all you. Just like Midas is you. But Meichen is you, but not about you. You know what I'm saying? It's your mind, but it's your mind allowing you to go to a place that your subjectivity will never allow you to go. You want to put it in different terms. This is what I just said now is a critical understanding of the whole Avodah, primarily of these steps. Make sense? In Sheidah Shanyanim, in the root, this would be how the Eirah Gvul and the Kelim lead to the Eirah Blikul, and all those levels, with Shir Atzmei B'Keich, all the way into the field of energy, all the way back to the source. But in how it pulls itself out in our lives, it's Midas, Meichen, and higher. Now, where we are now is still in the Midas Meichen level. The others is primarily leading Midas into Meichen, that they should have an Atzilus that is really complete. Matan Torah is going to bring in Kesser. That's why by Matan Torah, Shleish Ksarim, that's the whole Hamshach, Shoshik Dimul. That's when the Ksarim were given. Kesser can't be given until you have, it's like you can't have the 50th day until you count the 49. So the 49 actually is Midas, interestingly. I'm not thinking about it. The Birur HaMidas, the complete Birur. Well, how about how you Mavar Midas through Meichen? If you just left your Midas on their own, the whole point of Chesed B'Chesed, Gvura B'Chesed, is your mind is counting the Eimer, and your mind is telling you to think about that Midah and refine it. And that leads you to, ultimately, after 7 times 7, this leads you to Kesed, which will be Chamishim. Which seems excellent.
Right down here.
So the others is essential. Yeah, that's a plug. And so basically, that's it. That's very good. So the others are preparing the ground before Matan Torah. They're basically taking care of just making sure that the world recognizes godliness. They can't yet transform the darkness to light, as we spoke. The main thing is revelation, but revelation as it was before Chet Zadas, there should be a chsar. There should be no diminishing. As best as possible, filling all the gaps.
Is Kesser involved with the others, or is this coming in a Gilu with Mount Torah, or is it?
It didn't get there yet, but clearly it's a good Mount Torah.
It's always
You
there.
can't say they don't have any of it. There's always overlap. But primarily,
not as a Gilu.
and not Gilead, it's a Mount Torah. There's only one Mount Torah. This is very good. So that's what the whole case of the Midas is. So that's Midas. So now, as you see, the beauty here is also, it's not just Midas Meichen, not Midas and Bina, and that's Midas and Chochmah. In other words, there are real steps here to work with. It's not just a general idea. There's the real tools here.
Wow, so how come we didn't go through 70? Why is it only 49 days of Spirit?
This reasons it speaks about 7 times 7, not 7 times 10. Because the Aveda of Eimer is the Neichel Behema. It's primarily the Aveda of Midas. That's why it's only Meichen Rega guides them. You're not talking about the Meichen and Midas here. You're talking about primarily the Midas being refined by the intelligence. All refinement has to come from something outside of it. A Midah cannot refine itself. If you, for example, if a person is too greedy, or a person is too selfish, or a person is too whatever, it's too much chesed, or too much chura, chesed itself can't repair that. That's who you are. You need something from outside. The Meichen come and tell you, hey, look at your chesed, it needs some improvement, enhancement. So that's a natural thing.
So it's part of each one. I see.
Yeah. So, but it's always it's like the captain of the ship tells the ship, move this way, move that way. But the ship are the midas. There's no question about that. In this case, the ship are the midas. There are other times where you talk about Meichen Midas. I mean, not really relevant to the discussion here. I just brought that in because it fits very well to the whole flow. Okay. But Midas Sheba Chachma, however, is not a mitzvah. Sometimes you have to step back from all this thing, and this is what I just said is really the bird's eye view of the whole flow. So Kesser, Keches Pili, all Meichen Midas, and then back to Kesser. Yeah. That's right. It works for that. So they're not a mitzvah though. So here we go.
But also, one thing, you're starting on the count sphere, we start at the highest, we work way down. It seems like different than the flow. We're usually trying to, I mean, you would think you would start with the lower meters and work.
There is in our results, there's also those that count the other way. That the first day is Malchus Sheba Malchus.
Yeah.
The last is Chesed Sheba Chesed. There's explanations for this. Generally the best way to go is from Chesed Sheba Chesed to Malchus Sheba Malchus, because first of all, Chesed is the first midah, love. Everything starts with Chesed, Ozl, Kuli Yemin, it says. Yemin does not Kuli Yemin. So it's a place to begin. In the regular period, you always begin with how you love first, and then you work with Bura. You go Mamai Lamata. But it's not Mamai Lamata in the way conventional sense, because we're dealing with Chesed and Malchus all the time.
Yeah. And Malchus also becomes Kesser anyway. Yes.
Yeah, no, but okay. So the Midas Sheba Chachma, Gam Sheyesh Midas Gam Chachma, even though there's also a level of emotions in Chochmah, or inclinations, we can say. Or what do we say? Midas, we said, Midas also in Chochmah. I have a Chochmah in the Shaykh in Ibur. But a Chochmah, like a father, you can't call it, it's not Shaykh, not possible there in a state of pregnancy. Shamidas Sham Einum Prince Mitzias. Which was that mean? That the Midas there are not a state of Mitzias. They're not a state of substance. And this is what the transmission, this is the transmission from Chachma, is in a state that's not a Mechus Mitzias Dov. It's not a personality and a substantial identity. And therefore the Eir is also in a state of Eratzmi. It can now be in Iva Chayuicha. So here again, you see he's comparing. Iva Gamu Yechad, he compared to Midas. And in Meichen Bina is still a little more connected to Midas because the Ibur, it has in it pregnancy, it has in it pregnancy of the Midas.
An attachment to something other.
Yeah. Or another entity beginning, another outside entity beginning to form inside of it. Whereas the Chachma is still connected to its source, And that's Amshachet, so Mashachet will not be Muslim Tziddover. Therefore, the Eir is an Eir Atzmi, as we said before, not a reflection, an Eir Atzmi. And think of Chachma, just think practically. What is Chachma? Chachma is in the Kudah, the Dot, the Yud, spark of an idea. The spark of an idea is not possible to have in another entity. It itself doesn't have any substance, let alone carrying other substance. Bina is a fleshed out, the idea is now fleshed out in detail. So you have a substantial body of scholarship or thought, contemplation. So here you now have the fertile ground. Exactly. For it's like a womb. Yossi tells me that you are having he's going to. He called me yesterday. You're so excited by your excitement. So he's going to come here Sunday. Just to hear what's going on. I think he's missing secrets of resistance.
It's much more understandable here. Much more understandable.
I mean, here we're learning now.
It's have you to guide us. I mean,
no, first of all, you're learning this for months.
Yeah.
At some point, something pierces.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're learning that the milieu, it's exactly with this, we get Kevav here with the milieu, so like hey, with an olive, hey.
What you're learning in the others?
Yeah, it's such, we're blown away.
No, I understand. It's connected to what you're learning in the volume 2.
Sure.
Well, it's the same Rebbe Rashab, the same Ayin Beis. There should be a connection.
It seems like it. A lot of times it's like.
Okay, great. Excellent.
Yeah,
the Ikar Chayui B'chinas HaChochmah, because the primary Chayui, the primary level of Chayui is the level of Chochmah. Remember, the Alter Rebbe touches Chayui on energies, and this is the Tibuch, this is the reconciliation. The primary energy is in Chochmah. Remember, Eitz Chaim is the one that says that Chayui is Meichen, Gimel Rishenis, and Gamur is Ein Tachtenis. So now he's going even further. And the primary thing in Chachma and Bina is also in Chayui Gamur.
This is in a way answering the question they had originally, that the whole thing was the Klonis. It was affected by Teda. The Klonis thing was affected by Teda, the Meichen.
Okay.
This is part of it.
Fine, right? So he says in Eitz Chaim, he says, that Bina compared to Chachma is also called Gamui, which just makes it even nicer and gishmacher, because now you have is the Alter Rebbe says Chayuv Gamui is energies it contains. And Rizal Eitz Chaim says it's Moichin and Midas, or Gimel Shein Zayin Tachtenis, intelligence and emotions. And now we're saying where's the main primary energy that doesn't have Kelim, the main core is Chachma. And Bina is connected more to the lower level. So Bina compared to Chachma is like Gamui, which fits very well. So Bina is more Kelim than this. Inyan Hu, the Inyan of this is, Yidua, the Bezoyesh, Primis, V'chetzenis. Explaining that. Because it's not, in the Inyan, to explain this, it's known, because now it's known that in Zohar, Ampin, in the Midas, there's an inner and an outer dimension. The Chetzeni Zohar, B'chinas is Chalkus. Chetzeni Zohar, the outer dimension of Midas is his Chalkus. Is the distinction between one midah and another. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. The inner Zoh, B'chinas is Kalus. The inner Zoh is in a state of interconnectivity. Its focus is not on the distinction of the midas, but in their interconnectivity. Skalus. Skalus is more than unite. It's a Skalus. It's like Chesed Shebegvura, Gvura Shebechesed.
It includes.
Omeir Boy Shem Havaya. And there in the inner one, that's where Shem Havai illuminates, or radiates, or Kumoy Tiferes, Shekil Chesed Gvura. Shemei B'Shem Havai, like Tiferes. No, the Shem Havai is in Tiferes. What's Shem and Tiferes do? Tiferes primarily, well, one of the things in Tiferes is its scholars. What's Tiferes? It's beauty. It's a combination, Kel, that interconnects Chesed and Gvura, Shemei B'Shem Havai. Esha Shalom B'Mrei. I can give you an example. Like for example, by a human being, by the body. The body, the physical kufi evarim, which means the
The limbs.
the gufe, the limbs, the bodily limbs, they're separate and they're distinct. They're separate and distinct from one another. The mizgoy, the tivoi, both in their mezeg, which is their what do you call it, quality.
Composition.
Mezeg, some mezeg avir, you could say, it's like their. But mezeg is usually their composition is a good word, yeah. Yeah, composition, the tivoi, and nature. It's not the same thing. For example, mezeg would be, chesed is very warm today. That could change, like temperature. Tiva is more the nature of something, the fundamental nature. Mezeg more is it's like mezeg changes. Like we say when you eat certain fruits, it says the mezeg of the body of the faculties even change. Your mind thinks clearer with certain foods. Other foods thicken the membranes. Hayad lichte v'ayin lives. So they're distinct. For example, the hand to write and the eye to see. Very distinct and different, two different faculties. And they function differently. They're not just different, they function different rules. That's external. External, you see an arm, a leg, an eye, an ear. But if you think of moment primis, look how they work together in one body. They're not working as distinct entities. They're all coordinated. Eye and hand coordination, etc., etc. Now he's going back to Zohar to understand the Nimshal. The moral of this
that's what it means, Kulim Zem, is that they work together, basically?
Yeah, not basically, exactly. Look, in the body, you can look at distinct elements of the body, you can talk about their interconnectivity. That's the scout. Same thing as the Maila, this is the Mashal. Same thing with the outer dimension of Zohar, Midas. The Midas there are focusing on Muvdalim. They're separate, they're distinct and separate from one another. But in Pnimius, that's in Pnimius. In Pnimius, the inner dimension, they're in an interconnective state that comes from that comes from Shem Ma de Tikkun, which is Shem Havaya. Shem Ma creates the bittul, and Tikkun you have Iskalus. In Toyu, for example, they always talk about Schalkus. You have 10 spheres, but they're very separate. Think of a human body, God forbid, where there's no coordination. Think of nature that's fighting with each other. Think of human beings. So basically you say in the Toyu, the intensity of each energy created a very strong, there's a strong Schalkus there. There's no Iskalus. Iskalus is, for example, in Toyu, you have the spheres will be Chachma through Malchus, one line. One line is not a structure. In Toyu, in Tikkun, it'll be Chachma being a Das, Chesed, Word, Tiferet, and that's a Chikah. So you have a structure. Right, left, the spine. The human body would have one long line, all our faculties, we wouldn't be able to function. Even the physical skeleton, you have to have a spine that really creates the balance. The spine essentially branches out, and you create the balance within the structure. So Shem Ma, the Tikkun, is essentially telling us that Shem Ma, the bittul of Havaya, causes this to be this way. Like it says in Siddur, Siddur Shamed is the Siddur of called the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe or the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe composed a Siddur in Dach in his time. It was printed. That is my Moram that the Alter Rebbe said. I mentioned this several times. On Shabbos, some Shabbos that he spoke on Siddur explanations, and he gathered together all in one Siddur. So Sharamedim, that's where he says this. And this is like level of Chochmah, that's the level of Shema. So he's going now back. Remember, this is all an explanation of the Chochmah and Bina, which is the difference between two levels of Zohar, the outer and inner. So he says, more detail, this is the level of Chochmah, that's the level of Ma.
Right.
Now
that's the Pnimius?
That's the Pnimius, yeah. That's where there's this, right, this Kalos. As opposed to Ibur, that's where there's no Metzias Dover. The Ibur is really where it begins to have another entity because it's starting to split into parts. Now he goes back and connects and ties up the whole thing to what the beginning of the Indian. This is like a new paragraph almost. It's a real summation here. V'zeu the Hamshach Ha'Da'avis Shemshichu Gila L'Kuz. We bring it all back now to the Ovis. This is the transmission of the Ovis that they transmitted, they drew down of the divine revelation. V'hainu Shemshichu M'chinas Iyu V'chayu Echad. That means they drew down to the level of Iyu V'chayu Echad, which is the Keich Ablikvul, as it unites with the energy, with the Eprim. The Yisavas element of M'chinas Garmui. Creation of the world is from the level of Garmui. Garmui, both interpretations, Kalim, Bides, etc. Bina, the M'chinas Iyu Shemisach, and the level of Iyu, as we said, that connects with the container, with the energy that connects with the instrument that creates, is only the outer dimension.
Says here, Ba'alvis B'Shechua Sa'ir B'Chinas Haba Shezah B'Chinas Chilui. Chapter, yeah.
I'm happy to hear that it's consistent. It gets complicated when there's contradictions. By Yichud Urach L'Tzerech Esavis. And the Yichud also, so first of all, comes from a dimension that's outer, the outer dimension of energy, as we spoke. Remember, the air that manifests in containers is impacted by the containers, it's Megashim. That's the existence, that's creation of existence, that's not the others. And also the Yichud, the unity, is only the unity that God unites with the instrument that He uses to paint the painting, as we discussed. So it's only L'Tzedech Esav Shub Chinas Helam. This Yichud of Garmui, Iyu Garmui Chad, is a lower form of Yichud because it's only in relation to creating. Therefore, it's in the form of concealment, as we learned earlier, because it has to create a yesh v'nifra. It has to create something that's a separate entity. So it has to be concealed from it. It conceals most of its power. That's Achai they taste for say. I'm sorry. The Avis, however, drew down from the higher level. The Eres Hagam came by B'chinas Midah. It goes back. The Eres Chayu also come Midah. Remember, Shir Asmei B'Kayah, God wanted energy to manifest in a structure. So it's in the vision of the artist. He's envisioning Chesed and Gvura. Achai they taste for say. Like you said at the end of the last chapter. What was Iyu B'Chayu? What did Iyu B'Chayu Echad? Iyu add? What's the point? Iyu B'Chayu Echad. That even the energies, as they manifest in Gvul, which the others draw down, that too is through the additional energy from Iyu. That causes the Hamshach to be not going to be Gvul. That's what we said. Remember, Ad Bli Dai. And it draws down the energy and the revelation, all the levels, all the way down to below. Okay, so the Ovis are, so we have Iyu Garmui Chad would be like, if you remember, the Yichud to create existence and maintain existence. And there's the Yichud that the Ovis bring in, which is what he said earlier, was Yisrael Sab and Funa, was already Meichen connected to Midas, is a higher dimension, but it's still within the parameters of Gvul, but it's bringing Gvul to the farthest level. It's not Eir HaBli Gvul Mamash. It's expanding Eir HaGvul as much as you can. Remember what he said about Ad Bli Dai. Avol, Ba'achel calls that, nevertheless, after all this, Hagam Shabbos Yishum Chiz Gilei L'Kuz, even though that was drew down the level of divine revelation, we'll come up and call Sam Shachim, B'chinas Ha'er, to say the Shtalshus. Even though they drew down Taka from the Ehu and divine revelation, nevertheless, the general Hamshacha, the general transmission is from the levels of Er Seder Shtalshus. It's just the highest point where Gvul meets Gvul, but it's still the structure of the cosmic order. He said this befedish many times before. However, they brought down from the root and source of the structure of the cosmic order. Like it is the Chachma, the Reishis, the beginning, the head, and the beginning, the head of Ishtalshus, of the hierarchy. And the transmission should not be in a form that's just confined with the Gvul, but as much as possible, bring them from the Eir HaBli Gvul. And that's why they drew down to fulfill the lack of the level of Malchus. Remember the full moon. And they say through that they drew down Elikus also below. However, it's still not Mamish. It's not a new energy. It's still from the channels, from the track 2, which is the track of creation. However, it goes all the way to the root. Remember we spoke, you could have the water flowing through the pipes, but the pipes get rusty. as they did through Chetei Tzadas in the 7 generations. The others went back to the source and brought back the energy fresh as it was by creation, but it's still not what's beyond. It never was a new, completely new energy. They brought back to the way it was before Chetei Tzadas. It's consistent.
Higher than the way it was.
I can't go into it now because I got to. But
You know,
it's very consistent. He says it here too. He says ishtalshlus, but it's still to the edge of it. It's very
Gracious ishtalshlus.
Yeah. The Zohar has been Namshach the Ovis, Namshach the Mantera. This is the difference between the transmission of the Ovis and the transmission of Mantera, Sinai. The Ovis and Shicharek Mesher Shemot ishtalshlus. The Ovis drew down only from the root and source of cosmic order. Mantera Nimshach Gili Echad Mamish. Mantera they drew down Mamish and Nuhay. Just read quickly the Kitzur.
It's 10.
The root of creation is from the level of Zah, Garmui Lefia Eitz Chaim. That's Garmui, according to the Eitz Chaim. But Alter Rebbe, Garmui is the Kelim. The Gimel Sheinish and Etzem Atikun B'chinas Ma. The 3 first ones, Etzem Atikun from the level of Ma. The Zah Medbir Eris L'Tzutzes Kelim. Zah comes from the refinement of Eris L'Tzutzes Teyu, B'chinas Metzias. As we said, it's a substance. The latest under this in Amechem is B'chinas Metzias, and the birth of the Midas from Mechem is that they should be in existence. Begami, the Shababina, and B'chinas Metzias, and also Midas and Bina are a substance, like the pregnancy of Chachma and Metzias. Chachma, they're not a substance. They don't have substance. The from Chachma it transmits into Pnimiyazah, so Ikra Tikkun Ve'Skalas. That's where the primary Tikkun takes place. Does he say for full Tikkun? Okay. Yeshema the Tikkun. Primary Tikkun takes place in Pnimiyazah, because that's what it creates the Tikkun to Tayu. Tayu was this vision. And Tikkun is interconnectivity. So where's the magnetic connectivity? In Pnimiyazah, which comes from Chachma. Chitzeni is from Bina, basically what he's alluding to. This is what David drew down, transmitted from Iyu V'chayu, because of Medeshis Eshtalshus, actually, all this is from the beginning of Eshtalshus, but not according to Kavamida. It's not the regular flow of the pipe. It's not the regular flow, what we call the measuring stick, what we call it, the
yardstick.
The yardstick, the filter, the gauge. It's only fulfilling the lack. But Matan Torah, a new energy completely withdrawn. Okay, we'll stop here. End of chapter 156, pages 308 and 309.